Well, it's pretty early in the morning here in Los Angeles. I thought I was in London there for a second. I'm actually in LA. And I thought I'd do a little chat for anyone who's interested about the implications of creative writing in artificial intelligence applications, which of course is quite a major subject if you think about it. There's been this tendency to use this term conversation design to cover a lot of the conversational aspects of creative in AI. And I'm not sure that's a very good idea, because I see the UI, I see conversation design as a euphemism for a subset of user experience design, which is great. But it's not creative writing per se. And I think the reason that there's been this tendency to do that is to kind of please the techies, really. They don't like the idea of creative. They think human creativity is something they can replace. It's a sort of solutionist idea of theirs, but it's just not going to happen. And if it does, it kind of means the end of the humanity of the human race as a going concern, and then we'd be headed towards this whole sort of Kurzweilian, what I regard, I hate to say this, as a sort of nightmarish scenario of basically a fusion between the sentient abilities of a machine and the abilities of the human being competing, until finally we're basically pensioned off out of the system, sent out in an ice flow. And it'll just be like the Flight of the Conchords song with the robots, except a slightly different decade. So let's just have a look at the implications of what creative writing is, the implications of creative writing on the AI process. And I think you'll find that actually it's quite a major deal. First of all, in order to put creative writing into the process, you have to believe in it, which I think from a cultural standpoint, as I mentioned, is not exactly an easy sell. And I think that depends who's running the AI and who is regulating the AI, and how the AI is going to play its part within the overall structure of applications and within an enterprise, within a public sector format, whatever the circumstances of the client happen to be. But nevertheless, there's a tussle to be had there, and I think we're going to have it, and I hope we're going to win if enough people come on board with the idea that human intelligence, or HI as I call it, is a necessary adjunct, or in fact a superior force ultimately to AI, which has to be essentially subservient to the human side. Otherwise, what's the point, really? So with that in mind, let's move on to the next step, which is how do we do it? What's the organizational aspect of this? Assuming there's been buy-in from the senior team of the application or the client in general about the role of human intelligence and the role of creative writing, which, as I mentioned, is not easy, but we're going to try. I think we have to see this process as an organizational, somewhat holistic enterprise. I mean, writing in itself is a holistic enterprise. You bring together different parts of writing, different aspects of writing, plot, character, dialogue, etc., to put together a novel, to put together a screenplay. They are like little cogs in a watch. It's a matrix that changes and flows depending on what the variables are throughout its form. Now, the same is true of the relationship between HI and AI. I mean, HI may be super dominant in certain circumstances and somewhat dominant in other circumstances. But it's very rarely going to be subservient, unless it's a completely data-driven application, in which case the HI is there to essentially be the, what's the word? The mechanism, not a big word there, I just missed it. mechanism for transferring what would otherwise be sort of impermeable data to a naturally understandable form for people, for users, for practitioners, etc. But for the most part, these things are all have to be worked out beforehand. Whatever the role of creative writing is in your AI process, we have to establish the ground rules before we start. We can't just fly right in to deal with this. So that means we have to have a separate HI team in any AI application process or multi-application process for that matter. And we have to establish ground rules for each part and each scenario and each element of the process, so that everyone is on the same page as far as what is and what isn't happening as far as the relationship is concerned between HI and AI. In the next few weeks, we'll talk a little bit about how that might pan out and what kind of detail we'll be using and what kind of rules we'll be establishing. But suffice it to say now, if we don't have those rules, if we haven't sat down with our teams and established a sort of détente, a framework for progress and conduct, then I think we're going to have a serious problem. I think people are failing to understand that needs to happen, and otherwise we're going to have a series of applications which are either too AI, forget the either, they're going to be too AI for their own good, and that will be a problem. Now, I think one of the things in our favor is that there is a move towards, when I say our favor, I mean human intelligence's favor, is a move towards more regulation in artificial intelligence and algorithmic design over time. We know now that algorithms and AI are a product essentially of their creators, and therefore, as a result, I mean, there is a debate actually as to whether it's AI at all, because artificial it is not. It is created by people who create it, and therefore it is essentially an adjunct of human intelligence. One could in fact say, and I hate to complicate matters, that it's human intelligence of an algorithmic nature versus human intelligence of a creative nature, which may or may not make it easier or harder. But nevertheless, both sides will have their staunch supporters and their banners and their fighters and their leaders, and there is a chance of conflict unless cooler heads prevail and we're able to establish a set of ground rules of engagement, one might even call them, for each particular scenario and application creation process. At this point, I just think we should say that we've got a lot of work to do, and we've got a lot of thinking to do, and we have to manage our way out of this, because I really do believe that we're going to end up with a lot of albatross-type AI applications in the worst-case scenario, which are going to be useful if you're, Jeff Bezos and you're trying to sort of optimize your delivery process, which just is a pure data-driven exercise, or other such sort of essentially inhuman events. But if it comes to trying to involve people in an altruistic experience that will help rebuild government, will help to make an enterprise more efficient and productive, or help to make public sector more efficient and productive without being harsh and, dare I say it, a sort of almost Kafkaesque type of experience for the user, then we're going to need to be much more careful about how we put together our teams, how we structure these events. And that means a recognition on both sides of the importance of the other. A recognition on both sides of the importance of the other. Human intelligence is important, artificial intelligence is important, and that's critical. So with that, I think I'm actually live, by the way, so I don't know if that means anything. But I think this will survive after the event. So with that, and I apologize, I haven't shaved this morning, it's still quite early, but next time I promise I'll look slightly more, human, perhaps you could say. But I just want to leave you with that. last summary, which is to say that we have to find a managerial solution to putting AI and HI in the same room, literally, in terms of the people running the shows, each of the shows, and finding a set of ground rules, rules of engagement, so that they can work together as teams, separate teams, to fuse creative writing, creativity in general, into an artificial intelligence application. That's it for now. I've just run over the 10-minute mark. If anyone's still here after I just been babbling on endlessly, I thank you profusely. If not, you can come back and view the rest at your leisure, or leisure if you come from where I come from. And good morning.